I thought it would be good to make a little presentation of the Ogham illustrations that I drew for my father's book. My dad died in January this year, but we began working on this book back in 2013, so a long time ago, really. Book one of the Chronicles of Ogus. There are books 2 and 3 and 4 sketched out. Book 2 is actually finished. It just needs my illustrations for it. So I thought I'd introduce the story if people don't know it. Book 1 is all based on Celtic mythology. It's a novel, it's an adventure story, and it tells the story of a Neolithic Bronze Age man called Ogus, and he has a wolf as his companion, Jacob. What happened in the real world is my dad lived in Tewkesbury in Gloucestershire, and he had a lady friend, a lady called Freddie, and she died, and it hit my dad quite hard. He was in his early 70s, and he missed her very much. And he would walk his own dog. He had a black Labrador called Jacob, and my dad would walk Jacob around Tewkesbury Abbey every day. And as he was walking those days, this story gradually manifested in him, and he had to write it down. So my dad and we'd always shared an interest in Celtic mythology and Celtic history, but there was never a sign that my dad would write a book one day. It came as a complete surprise when he did. And it's a complicated story as well, and it is full of Welsh and Irish and Scottish mythology and sacred places. But what my dad has tried to do, and it's quite difficult really, is he's tried to take us out of normal reality into the other world. So from a simple perspective, this world, the real world that we inhabit, that we're incarnated in, has time. Time is linear. Tuesday follows Monday and all of that kind of thing. And 19th century follows the 18th century. But theoretically, in the Celtic other world, there is no time. A famous writer called Fiona MacLeod in the 1800s who wrote, "Time was not, time is not." In the spirit world, there is no time. So when the main character of this story, Ogus, interacts with the spirit world, some elements are Bronze Age, some elements are Dark Age, some elements are Iron Age, it all interweaves. And so that can be quite confusing. It's not that my dad didn't have a good grasp on history. He just was trying to portray a realm or an other world that was all time and no time. So that's a challenge for the reader, but it does make sense if you persevere with the story. So simplistically, I guess, the main character, Ogus, is a little bit like my dad. The story's told in the first person, so it's Ogus telling the story. And he has a wolf as a companion. Of course, my dad had Jacob, the black Labrador, and Ogus has a wolf companion called Jacob. So Jacob, very similar to Jacob, of course. Anyway, you don't notice straight away, but the story begins with Ogus feeling a strong desire to travel from what is the landscape of Tewkesbury before Tewkesbury existed, so the Gloucestershire landscape of the River Severn, and he has a strong desire to go to the Orkney Islands. That's where his ancestors came from. So he takes it on himself to travel from the River Severn in Gloucestershire all the way up through Wales to the Orkneys. That's his driving urge at the beginning. And of course, Jacob the Wolf follows him, and they have lots of adventures. Now, it doesn't dawn on him straight away that he's actually died, and it's actually his soul returning to his ancestral grounds, if you like. And it takes a while for him to realize that, hang on a moment, he is physically dead. And it's about his soul's transition from being a mortal person into being an immortal shining one of the she, the eternal spirits of light. So anyway, the story unfolds, and I'll go over it as I show you some of the pictures. Book one, my dad, quite scholarly, really, and the vision for the 4 books is that each book is a different period of time, with Ogus time traveling or popping in and out of the other world. And each book is a different period of time, but also a different alphabet. So that kind of dictates the artwork as well. So book one, the alphabet for book one is the Celtic alphabet, the Ogham. It's shown here in this circular design, the various symbols going around in a circle from like 1 o'clock all the way around to midnight are the 20 letters of the Ogham, and that's an alphabet. And since the 14th century, each alphabet letter has corresponded with a tree, and it may be older than that, but we can't trace it back any further than about 1390 AD. But theoretically, every letter of the Ogham alphabet is a tree. So for the illustrations for book one, I did 20 full-page fine art illustrations, each one for a different tree of the Ogham alphabet. And they're the pictures I'm going to show you. Book two happens in the Dark Ages, the time of King Arthur, and the Saxons are pushing the Britons into the western mountains of what becomes Wales. And the alphabet for book two is the Elder Futhark, the runes, and there's 24 of them. So there will be 24 illustrations in book two for the 24 letters of the runic alphabet, the Elder Futhark Saxon runes. Book three takes you into kind of the 12th century, 13th century, and Ogus has come back yet again from the other world. And this time he's appearing as a ghost and interacting with various monks in Christian abbeys and cathedrals where they have scriptoriums and their handwriting books and all the rest of it. So there'll be some strange goings on in the medieval days. And the alphabet for book three is the classical Latin ecclesiastical alphabet. So then there will be 26 illustrations, each one for each letter of the Latin alphabet, and done in a kind of medievally way that tells the story of book three. Book four, even more obscure, and it's going to be a bit of a headache to do, but I will see it through. Book four is Elizabethan England, so the 1500s going up to the beginning of the 1600s, and a very unusual alphabet known as the Enochian alphabet, which is an angelical alphabet created by Elizabeth I's wizard, Dr. John Dee. So the whole scheme of the Chronicles of Ogus, going through 4 books and 4 alphabets, and the eternal spirit of Ogus interacting between the Celtic otherworld and the mortal world of human beings who are stuck in their arrow of time going through their centuries. But for Ogus, popping back and forth, he goes back to a place where there's no time and then pops back to this world, and 400 years, 500 years have passed by. Anyway, book one, I'm going to show you the 20 illustrations. I'm showing you them in the Ogham sequence. That's not the sequence they appear in the book. They're a bit more random in the book, and I'm going to show you it this way because I don't want to give too much of the story away. So if I showed them to you in the sequence of the story, it would ruin the story a little bit. So I'm just showing them in a traditional A, B, C, D, E, F, G kind of way, you know, the Ogham sequence. Playing with my laptop at the same time. So this is the first Ogham illustration, and it is actually the first one in the story, contradicting what I just said, but all of the others will be more misplaced. So Ogus and Jacob the wolf get to the River Severn, and this friend of theirs picks them up in his coracle, a little boat, to take them across to the other side of the River Severn, where a hedge witch called Freyok is waiting for them. And Freyok is going to help them travel through Wales and seek the help of different Welsh gods and goddesses at different sacred sites. Now, just as much as Ogus is kind of my dad and Jacob is Jacob the Labrador, Freyok is an acknowledgement to Freddie, the friend of my dad who died, you know. Now, symbolically then, the very first thing, and he's innocent and unaware of it, but crossing the river is literally going from this world to the other world. You know, it's like the river Styx or takes you to the Grey Havens or wherever, you know. So as soon as this guy's like the ferryman, is going to take you to the other world, really. There's no coming back now, you know. And of course, like Dad's real friend Freddie, Freyok is dead. She's in the other world, but she's not going to tell Ogus straight away that he's dead as well. She's going to help him transition from mortal to immortal as they travel through Wales. This is a second illustration. This one is for the rowan tree. The previous one was for the birch tree. So the rowan tree actually corresponds in the story with a character called Scathach, and she was a goddess warrior who trained Cahulin how to be a warrior. She lived on the Isle of Skye in the Castle of Shadows, where in the story, she has a kind of Celtic martial art training school where she trains young warriors. But for those in the know, she's a queen sitting on a throne next to a great bear. So that's Cassiopeia and Ursa Major. So there's elements of star lore in the pictures, of course, although they're not important to the story. It's just me being true to Ogham star lore as well as doing an Ogham illustration. But my dad did have a big bear as Scathach's companion in the story. And the big bear and Jacob the wolf have a friendship. This is for the older tree, and older is very much about overcoming troubled waters. And there's a part of the story where a sea monster is going to bring the ship down that Ogus and Jacob are traveling in, and they're rescued by sea lions and seals. So it's a friend over troubled water kind of image. Willow, if you look carefully in the middle, there's a man and woman going off into the distance. And there's Jacob the wolf in the foreground. And a young lady, and I'm not going to say too much about any of that, really. I'm not wanting to spoil the story. This is for the ash tree, and this is a sacred site in Anglesey called Bryn Gelli Dee. And the Ogham chart in the bottom is known as Fion's Window, which is from the Book of Ballymote. So that's old Ogham symbolism charts thing. As Ogus travels to Orkney, they visit lots of ancient sites like Bryn Dee, and they do things in the barrows. You know, they communicate with other spirits, and they use the barrows for traveling from one place to another place as well, almost like portals and things. But there are also real places in the real world that you can go and visit, you know, so that's quite important. It's a fictional story, but it interacts with lots of gods and goddesses, but it also takes you on a journey through the geography of the British Isles, from the River Severn up through Wales to the Western Isles of Scotland to Orkney, and then all the way back down to Glastonbury and Salisbury Plain. You know, there's a whole lot going on in the Bronze Age. This is for the hawthorn, the 6th letter in the Ogham alphabet. And this is a waterfall in Wales. That's real. I've been quite true to a photograph. It looks like that. This is Pistol Rider, kind of North Wales-ish, towards the border between Wales and Britain, England. The white horse is important. A lot of the gods and goddesses shapeshift. So this white horse is actually one of the goddesses. Hey, this is this kind of rocky thing at the bottom is a real place, and I can't at the moment remember what it's called, but it's a famous grave of somebody, and it's up in Scotland, and that's about all I can say without giving too much of the story away. But it's used for an old god to sleep off for a while, so even the gods have to rest, you know. But yeah, there's a lot of intrigues going on with ancient sites and barrows, and I don't want to give too much of the story away. This guy is for holly. The previous guy was for oak, and the holly character is a character in the story. It's not specifically holly, but mostly holly, and his name's Waifnir, and he is the green man. He's the spirit of the woods, and he interacts with Ogus and Jacob and their friends. Is Ogma himself the creator of the Ogham writing system? There's an interaction with Ogma and other Irish gods and goddesses on the trip to Ireland. Again, not wanting to give too much away. Some of the story is a little bit sexy. There's nothing crude, there's nothing explicit, but there is some lovemaking scenes and mild erotica. You know, that's my dad as well, you know. This image for the apple tree is actually an interesting paranormal event in the story where 4 people all have the same dream at the same time, and it's a bit of an erotic dream, you know. I'm not going to say too much about that either, but there is a story for adults, but nothing is explicit or overly crude. My dad, quite cheeky but very romantic, so it's suggestive rather than literal, you know. Yeah. This is for the vine, the 11th letter in the Ogham alphabet, and it's another god. He's an old god that's dying. Again, I guess that the gods and goddesses are immortal, but they also, and they're timeless, and they're in a timeless realm, but they also have stories, so they're kind of in a liminal place, and they need to sleep and rebirth now and then. There's a complicated thing of there being time and no time in the liminal spaces between this world and the other world. Difficult to write about, difficult to explain. You just have to read the story and treat it as a dream, really. You know, Dad is delving into metaphysical realities, you know. And Ogus is learning about this world and the other world in the story. This is the first drawing I did for the whole project. So it was February 2014. I talked about gods and goddesses shape-shifting. So there's two swans in this picture, and they're both holding a golden chain. They're connected by a golden chain. And Jakob, the wolf, is between them, of course, howling. But the two swans are two goddesses. They're two sea goddesses, Fand and Laban. But they can shapeshift into swans and seagulls and any kind of seaside bird they can shapeshift into. Daughters of Manannán or something. Here is Blodeuwedd, Welsh flower goddess, and she's a significant part of the story. She's not the main heroine of the story, but she's a significant plot twist in the whole story. And I can't say too much about it, but my dad has taken on board the Welsh story of Blodeuwedd from the Mabinogion, but he's put his own spin on it and is taking it into another direction. And that's about all I'm going to say. There's some surprises there in the story. This is for Blackthorn, and this is the kind of love interest of Ogus. He does meet a lady in the other world, and there's some twists in the story with that too. And she becomes a Celtic warrior, and she's trained to fight by Scathach on the Isle of Skye stuff. And she becomes a warrior of quite big renown, you know, and a traveling companion of Ogus. That's about all I can say about that as well. But her name's Freyok too. There's a different Freyok. It's a recurring name. It's actually Gaelic for heather, as in the shrub, the purple shrub. This is a drawing I did for the book. This is for the elder tree. And in the story, she represents the oldest witch goddess, Circe. And it's actually a portrait of a famous lady called Margaret Murray, who actually lived to 100 years old. And this is a portrait of her when she was 100 years old. She wrote an autobiography when she was 100, and she called it My First 100 Years. She was an Egyptologist, and she wrote books on witchcraft, and modern Wicca from Gerald Gardner onwards was inspired by her writings mainly. And she did put all her kind of academic nuance into studying traditional witchcraft, the 1600s and 1700s and so on. So honoring the elder, if you like, you know, and she plays the elder witch goddess in the story. This is the pine, and it's actually a portrait of myself and my dad from many years ago from an old photograph. But in the story, it represents Taliesin talking to a Greek traveler called Pythias, and they're talking about Star-Lord. That's about all I can say of that. And the female figure represents one of the Pleiades, you know. So this is Jakob, but it also refers to a reference in northern Scotland of the last wolf howling at the moon. The wolves of the area have been killed by the human beings protecting their sheep and stuff, you know. And so it's a lament, if you like, to the native wolves being killed. So it's the last wolf howling at the moon, a gorse. Heather. Remember, Freyok means heather, and there is a love-making scene between Ogus and Freyok, and that's for that one. Aspen invokes a part of the story in which the Morrigan appears, the triple goddess, war goddess of Island Morrigan. That's for the aspen tree. And the final illustration, not in sequence in the book, but this is for the yew tree, and it kind of represents the sacred grove, and it represents the Celtic goddess Nematona, she of the sacred grove, if you like. And so that's all 20 illustrations from the book. Now, a lot of those illustrations are still available to purchase. They're quite expensive. And that was well, they're rare anyway. You know, probably each drawing takes 15 to 20 hours, and they're rare, and they're in print now. I think there's I've sold about 4 or 5 of them. But anyway, the ones that are left that are still available will go towards helping me get by so that I can do the illustrations for books 2, 3, and 4, you know. So I have to earn money, just like everybody else. And if I'm not doing artwork for this, then I'm doing jobs for other people, and these books don't manifest, you know. So hopefully can sell some of the drawings, and when I start doing the 24 runic illustrations for book 2, be selling those as well, and each person that buys a drawing gets their name in the book as a custodian of that drawing. I mean, they keep the original artwork, but they'll also be in the book in print and so on. Anyway, I'm just going to shut this, stop sharing this PowerPoint now. Here's the actual book. It's big. Like it's I don't know how big it is. Bigger than A4 anyway, and it's a hardback. Book 1 of the Chronicles of Ogus. It's available on Amazon. There's 2 versions. There's a color version, which is this one, and there's a black and white one. And the black and white one is much cheaper. The color version gets expensive just because of the color printing process is expensive. So there is a black and white version, which is also hardback. So if you know, if not, I know everyone can't afford to buy original artwork, but certainly you could buy a copy of the book, and that helped me do book 2 as well. Look at this. So my dad died in January. The funeral was in February, and scattering of the ashes around Tewkesbury Abbey in March. And luckily, I managed to get the book published before he died, so he did see the finished result. And last summer, about 6 months before he died, he gave me all of this. So that's book 2 is completely finished and written. So that's the runic one. It just needs me to edit it and do the illustrations. Book 3 is about half finished, and book 4 is very, very sketchy, just scribbled notes really. However, he and I talked about things a lot, and I pretty much know where he was going with books 3 and books 4, you know. And also myself, I have quite a big interest in Elizabethan England and Dr. John Dee, and I actually lent my John Dee books to my dad, you know. So and John Dee had connections with Tewkesbury, of course, you know, and then one of my dad's favorite pubs in that area as well. So yeah, it's going to be a big journey. I don't know when the book 2 will manifest. Like I said, there's 24 illustrations to do, and I haven't done any of them yet. When will I get to book 3 and book 4? No idea, you know. But it is a very special thing. It's a connection between father and son. even after the father has died. You know, I can still continue the project we were working on, and totally enjoyable, you know, exploring the metaphysical reality of life between this world and the other world, not just in the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, but coming through to medieval times and Elizabethan England times, you know. So anyway, that's the Chronicles of Ogus, book 1. Lots of nice Ogham lore in there, and lots of geographical descriptions of ancient sites, and lots of fun interacting with different gods and goddesses, and a few surprises in the mix, and a bit of sexiness as well. So all in all, pretty good thing. Thank you.